Hello there and welcome to another video by Dan the Gaming Man. This one is the first in a new series that I'll be working on called Franchise Focus, and in particular the Actua Sports franchise. The series of sports games only lasted a few years between their first release, Actua Soccer, in 1995, and their last game, Actua Pool, which came out in 1999. So let's focus on the franchise and look at a few of their releases during that time period. Actua Sports games were published by the UK-based Gremlin Interactive, and the word Actua is believed to have come about in response to Sega's Virtua series. With so many sports franchises around these days, most notably EA Sports and 2K Sports, let's go back in time and take a look back at Actua Sports and see what some of the games look like, and later on, towards the end of the video, discuss why the franchise no longer exists. Actua Soccer 3 is the final instalment of Actua Sports' flagship game series, released in late 1998 on Sony PlayStation and Windows the following year. The game was a notable challenger to FIFA, as it had more leagues and 450 teams to choose from. Most interestingly, it featured the English Football League sides from the Championship, League 1 and League 2 as it's known these days, something that FIFA didn't include until their 2004 edition. The game also featured commentary from the legendary Barry Davies, who famously commented on a whole host of sports, not just football, but also ice hockey, tennis, the Olympics, and of course, the World Stare-Out Championship.
And he has his lucky panda, Dee Dee, with him today, and lots of girls in the crowd with their little pandas too. I read somewhere that his fan club is now 250,000 members strong, and you get a free panda when you join.
I mean, he's a hero to the young, isn't he? He's the sort of man that will get young people looking at staring and saying, yes, I want to stare.
Davies is joined by Martin O'Neill, chipping in with some analysis from time to time. The game's box art proudly boasts endorsement from England international Alan Shearer, though that actually depends on where in the world you were, as other versions had George Weah, Ibrahim Ba and Olivia Bierhoff as their cover star. As for the soundtrack, I hope you like Robbie Williams, and more specifically his huge hit Let Me Entertain You, as you're going to be hearing it a lot. Yes, it is the only song featured on the soundtrack, so you'll find yourself moving through the menus as quickly as possible or simply muting the TV just to avoid him entertaining you. The game's intro is absolutely spectacular, featuring that emotional classical masterpiece Cavaliera Rusticana by Pietro Mascagni. Sorry for my pronunciation. It'll have you reaching for a box of tissues before you've even lifted your controller. The game itself is highly frustrating to control. I couldn't figure out if there was a way to switch between the players when out of possession, which meant that the opposing side were almost constantly causing issues for my keeper. Visually, the game is fine when compared to others on the system. Probably not quite as easy on the eye as FIFA or ISS Pro, but it's fine. The camera angle isn't the best, but I guess the developers felt that this would get you closer to the action. As touched on earlier, there are a lot of teams to choose from and you can play a few different modes, but it should be noted by modern players that the career or season mode is pretty bare bones when compared to modern games or even those that came out a year or two later. Overall, it isn't very fun to go back to this one. My fingers hurt after just 3 matches. They felt like I'd saved a shot from Thomas Hitzlsperger or David Hurst without any gloves on. If you remember either of those two players, let me know in the comments. Before we move on to our next game, I should just point out that the Actua Soccer games were also used for the match engine seen in the Premier Manager series, which was a sort of unofficial part of the Actua franchise. I did talk about Premier Manager 98 in my video about football management games on the system, card in the top right corner if you want to check that one out. Anyway, let's take a look at a different Actua Sports game. Next up is another game released in 1998, this time Actua Tennis. Barry Davies is here again, providing commentary, plus Sue Barker apparently, though I didn't hear her, with endorsement from cover star Greg Rudetsky, who is a playable character along with an epic roster, one that would bring shame to games that are released even today. It had just about everyone you could want from the 90s, including Pete Sampras, Andre Agassi, Patrick Rafter, Tim Henman, Carlos Moya, Venus Williams, Lindsay Davenport, Monica Seles, Steffi Graf, and Anna Kournikova. Remember her? Just to name a few. On top of the roster, there is a wide variety of venues to choose from, including clay, grass and hard courts, as you'd expect from any tennis game. The graphics aren't great, to be honest, although I did make a point of telling you how many real-life players are available to select. You wouldn't be able to tell who any of the characters are because the models are pretty generic looking. The graphics are passable, as this of course is a PlayStation 1 game, and we all know that these early 3D games weren't the best visually. So even if we can forgive the graphics, how about the gameplay we're being served? Well, take a look at the footage on screen. You can see for yourself that this game controls terribly. It's like I'm playing tennis with a racket made of spaghetti. And what is the sliding around about? The way that the players glide around the court. Does this game share its engine with Actua Ice Hockey? If so, I think that'll be a lot of fun when we get round to playing it. Doubles matches aren't great. My partner only seemed interested in going for half the balls. I also noticed that the commentary disappeared during doubles matches. Not sure if that was to save some processing power. There's a World Tour mode, but just like Actua Soccer 3, it's fairly basic. You can't do the kinds of things that are standard in modern tennis games. There's no training, no mini-games, no changing your outfits between tournaments. It's just non-stop matches. My final gripe with this game is that there are no on-screen scores. So after a lengthy rally, I actually had no idea what the score was. Well, apart from the random times that the score seemed to show up for just a few seconds. That said, it did have some interesting pop-ups throughout the matches, giving information about the number of aces, faults, fastest serve, etc. Actua Tennis does a really good job of making you appreciate how much better real tennis is. Sorry, that was a bit of a backhanded compliment. Look, I'm at breaking point here. Let's try another game from the Actua Sports franchise. Actua Ice Hockey 2 was released in 1999 and is the second and final entry in the series. I read during my research that this game had originally intended to have the NHL license, but because of a partnership between Gremlin and Fox Sports ending halfway through development, the license was pulled. This meant that in a similar fashion to ISS Pro, they had to change the vowels around in the players' names, as well as renaming all of the teams. For example, Wayne Grotzky played for the New York Vipers. But do you know what? This is not a bad game at all. It looks better than the other two we've looked at so far, and there are some lovely little details. For example, at one point my player was shoved into the boards and the glass shattered, appearing on the ice for a while afterward. I actually had a lot of fun playing this game, but I did realise that I don't know much about the rules of ice hockey, often getting pulled up for offsides, icing and checking, which I'm sure means something to somebody watching. The audio on this one is brilliant, with the sound of the organ piping in music throughout the match. Now, I'm not an ice hockey fan, but if I know one thing about the sport, is that this is true to life. The commentary and the presentation of the game also made me feel as if I was watching it on TV, although it was a bit repetitive at times. Overall, this one is worth checking out or revisiting if you're already familiar with it. Actua Pool is a funny one, as it was released under 3 different names, so you might know it as Pool Shark or Ultimate 8-Ball. Not sure why this was the case, and it doesn't really matter because it is still an Actua game. That said, it does have a different feel to it than the others on this list. You wouldn't know that it was from the same franchise if not for the on-screen branding. There are a whole host of options here, with an area that allows you to practice or become more familiar with the rules in the School of Pool, plus a hustle mode, trick shots and tournaments. It also caters for those who prefer UK or US rules. There are different ways to play too, with 8-ball, 9-ball, killer, bank and 1-pocket game rules available. There are a few characters and locations to choose from, which I think is standard with all of these Actua Sports games. I think it looks pretty good for the time, though my copy seemed to have weird lines on all of the balls. As I said, the sound effects were top notch, as they've been for all the previous games too, by the way, but I think some music would have been nice, though not Robbie Williams. That would be a miscue. And we've arrived at our final stop on the Actua Sports line. Actua Golf 3 was the final instalment of that series. Like Soccer and Tennis, this one proudly displays an endorsement on the cover, this time from Lee Westwood. And as we've seen with some of the other games, this one packs in as many characters for you to choose from as possible, including Greg Norman, Ernie Els, Vijay Singh, Fred Couples, who I seem to remember from the PGA Tour Golf 2 on the Sega Mega Drive, Bernard Langer, Phil Mickelson and Nick Faldo, but oddly, no Lee Westwood. Maybe he needs to be unlocked. The main menu of this game is quite overwhelming for a non-golf fan such as me. There are so many options. I mean, where do you start? What does this all even mean? Anyway, I played a few rounds of golf and I found that this game is as difficult to get to grips with as with all the golf terminology. I mean, what is a bogey anyway? I'm assuming it's not, the thing you'd find in your nose. Sorry, that was really immature, but it reminds me of that joke. Why does a golfer wear 2 pairs of trousers? In case he gets a hole in one. You get it? Moving on. The game looks pretty good, and the commentary provided by Peter Alice and Alex Hay is brilliant. It had me laughing out loud a few times. One comment that stands out is, "That tree has been stood there, minding its own business for hundreds of years. I don't know what the golfer has against it," which was in response to me slicing a shot and hitting a tree at 110 miles an hour. I found this game to be very difficult, as I mentioned, but I was glad that the commentary team enjoyed ripping into me, which was lucky because I was wearing 2 pairs of trousers. Still not funny? Okay. Actua Sports had a few different series on the go, and were said to be working on a 4th Actua Golf game. But what happened? Why didn't it survive into the 2000s? Well, Gremlin were acquired by Infogrames, and although the team continued to develop games such as PGA European Tour Golf, UEFA Challenge, Slam Tennis and Premier Manager 2000, they were not released under the Actua Sports brand. In 2013, a browser-based game called Actua Poker was planned to be the first in a relaunch of the Actua Sports franchise, and it received backing on Kickstarter, but ultimately the project was scrapped, and as of 2024, there doesn't seem to be any further plans to bring Actua Sports back. But is there a place for Actua Sports? A quarter of a century after its last release? Well, you only have to look at the success of EA Sports and 2K Sports, who between them have pretty much sewn up the market. Would there be room for a third option? Perhaps a budget brand? Who knows? I for one would love to see Actua Sports return in some form, but with licensing as it is, it would be very difficult for them to compete. Though that said, nobody is currently developing games for the World Stare-Out Championships. They could even get Barry Davies involved. By the way, if you want to play any of these games for yourself, there is an Actua Sports collection available on Steam. I'll put a link in the description. And there you have it, the first in my series, Franchise Focus. Let me know in the comments which gaming franchise you'd like me to take a look at. Like and subscribe, and if you'd like to support the channel even more, then take a look at the video description, as I've recently added a channel membership program. As a thank you for your support, you'll have access to some cool perks. Anyway, thanks for watching, stay safe and keep gaming.